Is but one example. Scholars may disagree on the interpretation of various verses of the Quran and hadiths from, again, a quote, kill the polytheists wherever you find them in Surah 9:5, to, quote, whoever changes religion, put him to death, in the words of the Prophet Muhammad in the hadiths. But with these verses, even if not literal instructions, go on.
In the surah that you mentioned, the verse of the sword, can you recite the verse that comes before it and then also the verse that comes after it? And are you willing to accept that that verse was given in a very specific time regarding a very specific tribe that burnt or prevented the treaty that they had signed with Muslims, that is not a universal command upon all Muslims?
I think I'm about to get that. But ultimately, these verses, even if not literal instructions, even if not divine law, tell you something about the fundamental difference between Islam and other faiths.
You will have heard, for example, both from JL and Tommy Robinson, that the proposition calls the sword verse, kill the unbelievers wherever you find them. What you will not have heard is the verse immediately before it, which exempts anyone who has kept a peace treaty with the Muslims. You would not have heard the verse immediately after it, which orders Muslims to grant safe passage to any non-Muslim who asks for it and to escort them to safety. You will not have heard that every major classical commentator on the Quran across 1400 years and every Muslim that actually follows the scripture agrees that the verse was about a very specific group of Arab tribes who had signed a peace agreement with the early Muslim community and then broke it in the middle of war in 17th century Arabia. It is dishonest. It is dishonest to stand here, let me finish. It is dishonest to stand here and selectively quote and misrepresent and misquote. Let me get to the end of my point and I'll get to you. Let me get to the end of my quote and then I'll get to you. Let me get to the end of my point and I'll get to you.
Point information has been declined, Mr. Jones-Lyons.
It is not and has never been read by the scholarly tradition as a standing order for all Muslims in all centuries against everyone who does not share their faith. It has never been the case. And anyone who says that they follow Islam and have committed those crimes in that name, in that verse, is a liar and not a follower of our religion.
Put your hands up if you think it's okay for a man older than most of your dads, say in their 50s, to marry someone in infant school, let's say 6 years old, and consummate that marriage, rape, when the little girl reaches 9. By the way, that's year 5 doing key stage 2. Doing key stage 2. No, please, because I know many of you gentlemen should have your hands up at this point, no? We're going to get onto it, but you agree that Muhammad was perfect. As we know, he married a 6-year-old, had sex with her when she was 9. We've previously had this discussion.
You mentioned the verse in the Quran about prepubescent women being married. It's not true. Okay, if you knew what you were talking about, you wouldn't have said it. The word that's used for the female in the Quran is a word that's used for women. That ayah of the Quran was revealed because a man come to ask the Prophet, how do I divorce my wife if she does not have periods because she is past the age of period? She's a mature woman. That's what that was for.
The same pattern shows up with the hadith you mentioned about Aisha and the marriage. The claim that she was 6 at marriage and 9 at consummation. Except what they don't tell you is that the source who provided that recollection is not seen as concretely reliable, that the author of one of the earliest and most revered collections of hadith in Islamic law, Imam Malik, did not accept this narrator's report, and that various reconstructions, including from the Yaqeen Institute, put her age as far, far older. English common law, however, set the age of consent at 12 until 1875. Canon law permitted marriage from puberty. The marriage practices Mr. Robinson is condemned the whole of pre-modern civilization, including Christian Europe.
How many of you in here are gay? You don't actually need to put your hands up, okay? In the Quran, through the story of Lot, homosexuality is condemned, and 4 of the 5 major schools of Islamic law think it should be punishable by death. Maybe, I'm going to finish my speech. In fact, 24 countries where Islam is the state religion have criminal penalties for homosexuality. 8 of them is punishable by death. So while we're on the, maybe if you're gay, you might maybe be a little bit suspicious of this. That's in Afghanistan, Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Yemen. They kill you for being gay. Who's protesting about this?
Oh yes, it was said, doesn't Islam say you must kill gays, people who are homosexual? No, it doesn't. Not in a single verse, not in a single hadith. Brother, please tell me, how many gays did the Prophet Muhammad kill then? Why are you silent now?
The rape gangs I'm referring to were mentioned in the J report, were mentioned in the rape gang report published yesterday by Rupert Lowe. You may be a fan of him, I'm not sure. I was not referring to anybody's race. What I was referring to is the religion of Islam and how culturally it is proven very, very prominent in these rape gangs. I would direct the members of the House to the rape gang report published yesterday by the Member of Parliament for Great Yarmouth.
Across all child sexual offences in this country, around 88% of convicted offenders are white, and only a very small minority are from mixed or ethnic backgrounds. If we do not call that a white sex offender epidemic, why is the Speaker entitled to call a far smaller subset a Muslim one? The Home Office's own December 2020 review of group-based child sexual exploitation found that offenders are most commonly white. Will the Speaker tell the House that he is equally suspicious wholesale of white men as a whole? The abuse happened, the girls were real, the failures were real. I will not minimize any of it. And as a Muslim woman, I am not here to do so. In Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, the offender public's profiles on the headlines were dominated by British Pakistani Muslim men. That is true, that must be spoken about. But there is another truth that must be named alongside it. Those girls were working class. Working class girls in towns that had already been told their problems did not matter, failed by police officers who did not come, councils who looked away, institutions that decided their suffering was not worth the paperwork. Class contempt is what allowed this to continue for decades, and no girl, no working class girl, no girl of any background should ever have to learn that her pain is an administrative inconvenience. What Mr. Robinson never shows you, and what the rest of the bench will never talk to you about, is that 81% of child-based sexual offences were most commonly committed by white men. The government's own 2020 review of group-based child sexual exploitation said two things very clearly. First, that group-based child sexual exploitation offenders, let me please land, are most commonly white. I'm getting to that point. And second, that the data are too poor to show that any ethnic group is uniquely predisposed to offending or overrepresented as perpetrators. That answers your point. I hope you heard it.
But you don't need to be a writer to have suffered the violent intrusion of Islam into your life. On September the 11th, 2001, 19 hijackers cried Allahu Akbar as they murdered nearly 3,000 people in the name of Islam, flying planes into the Twin Towers. On the 7th of July, 2005, 4 British Muslim suicide bombers slaughtered 52 commuters on London's tube and a bus, declaring, "We are at war and I am a soldier." In 2013, Michael Adebilajo beheaded the young British soldier Lee Rigby in broad daylight on a Woolwich street, and then proudly told police and cameras, his hands dripping in blood, "I'm a soldier of Allah." Theo van Gogh, stabbed, shot, nearly decapitated in Amsterdam for criticising Islam.
I direct all members to take a look at the MI5 terror watch list, made up overwhelmingly of Islamist terrorists.
Suspicion of Muslims as a category has also been tried as a policy. Over 83,000 men from 25 mainly Muslim-majority countries were forced to register with US authorities under special registration. More than 13,000 were put into deportation proceedings. The number of terrorism convictions produced was 0. In the United Kingdom, between 2001 and 2011, fewer than 1% of terrorism-related arrests resulted in a conviction for a terrorism offence. It broke up thousands of families and consumed billions in resources, catching almost nothing.
Against the evidence. The evidence, they say, is ISIS, Palmyra, the Bamia Buddhas. Look, here is the clash. Here is why suspicion is rational. All they do is destroy. So let me take them to Jerusalem. In the Al-Aqsa complex, which is the third holiest site in Islam, there are Gothic rose windows. Crusader stonework preserved by Muslim custodians for 8 centuries. Salahuddin Ayyubi took Jerusalem in 1187 and left the Christian stonework standing. That is not a clash of civilizations. The Bamia, when the Taliban first proposed destroying the Buddhas, scholars from Al-Azhar University in Cairo flew to Kandahar to argue against it on theological grounds. Hazara Muslims took up arms to protect them. That tradition tried harder to save those statues than the West ever did. Which brings me to Palmyra. The man who died trying to save it was an 81-year-old Muslim man, tortured for a month and beheaded for refusing to talk. So who is Islamist violence actually killing? Not the West, it's Muslims. 91% of everyone killed by Islamist terrorism is Muslim. The Taliban has killed 69,000 people, ISIS 58,000, Boko Haram 25,000 people. All of them nearly Muslim, killed by men who called themselves the only true Muslims on earth. For 20 years, the West has pointed at the body count and blamed the corpses for suspicion.
To be suspicious of Islam. Let's talk about how suspicious Islam is of the West. The Policy Exchange report, titled Unsettled Belonging, published in 2016, which claims to be the most extensive research of British Muslims ever conducted, revealed that, let's do it, 43% of British Muslims supported the introduction of Sharia, not British law, Islamic law. 53% prefer to send their children to school with strong Muslim values, suspicious perhaps of Western ones. Maybe, I don't know. 44% that schools should be able to insist on face coverings. Does this sound like a community which seeks integration? Do we have a right to be suspicious of those who reject our values and the societal norms of their host country? 24% sympathise with violence organised by groups to protect their religion. That's what the Muslims say. And 31% thought that it was acceptable to keep more than one wife, illegal in Britain, but fine in Sharia apparently. And 35% believe that the Jews have too much power in the UK, 52% compulsory halal. I could go on and on and on and on. But most important to me is the free speech of this. So let's get this out, shall we? 78% of British Muslims believe that no publication should publish pictures of Muhammad. An overwhelming majority. That rises to 87%. That's 9 out of every 10 Muslims that are walking the streets today in a country which absolutely abandoned blasphemy laws. Suspicion is not strong enough a word. The West should resist Islam.
So let's see how those religious teachings translate into actual Muslim attitudes. Opium, last year, 85% of British Muslims back democracy as the best system of government. The general public, 71%. 94% back equal treatment under the law for all faiths and none. The general public, 80%. 7 in 10 say they feel loyal to the United Kingdom. The general public, 1 in 2. 8 in 10 interact with non-Muslims at least weekly. 9 in 10 stay standing against bigotry, including anti-Semitism, matters to them. 4 in 10 have served themselves or through family in public service. On every single one of those measures, British Muslims are more committed to British values than the British average. These are not numbers from a community at war with this country.
I just want to take up a few points that we've heard from the other side, which is really their strongest argument appears to be that anybody that's done something bad in the name of Islam actually wasn't really Muslim or wasn't really carrying out the true scripture of Islam. And indeed, they are non-believers. But even those people, Islam has some pretty vile treatments in store for.
The claim that the Quran is a manual of violence and that mainstream Islam is therefore inherently at war with and in contradiction with Western values is what I've heard tonight. You will have heard, for example, both from JL and Tommy Robinson, that the proposition calls the sword verse, kill the unbelievers wherever you find them. What you will not have heard is the verse immediately before it, which exempts anyone who has kept a peace treaty with the Muslims. You would not have heard the verse immediately after it, which orders Muslims to grant safe passage to any non-Muslim who asks for it and to escort them to safety. You will not have heard that every major classical commentator on the Quran across 1400 years and every Muslim that actually follows the scripture agrees that the verse was about a very specific group of Arab tribes who had signed a peace agreement with the early Muslim community and then broke it in the middle of war in 17th century Arabia.
Benefited from Islam during our history. What about Al-Khwarizmi? Circa 820, even a bit before my time, who gave us the advantage of numbers. It took us 300 years to get his numbering system into Latin, or even into English. But that has been the foundation of capitalism. Without the numbering system that has come to us from Islam, we would not have the strength of capitalism that has made us strong and rich and prosperous and successful. But what about the Laffer curve? Now, there may be some people here who like the Laffer curve. I love it. I love this idea that lower taxes are a jolly good thing. I want them to be a good deal lower. But Arthur Laffer himself recognizes the value of Ibn Khaldun, who wrote 600 years before Arthur Laffer in 1377. Beginning to come into my time. I think I was probably at school by then, but hadn't come up to Oxford yet. 1377, 600 years. What did he say? It's rather wonderful how he put it. He said that when a sultan comes to the throne, he has low taxes and lots of income, and when he's old, he has high taxes and no income. That is a beautiful encapsulation of the Laffer curve, and it comes from an Islamic scholar.
So let us be inductive. Let us look at what that suspicion actually produces. After 9/11, the West treated Islam as a civilizational enemy and called that suspicion prudence. The result was not safety. It was Abu Ghraib, it was Guantanamo Bay, men who were held for decades without charge, men like Ahmed Rabbani, a taxi driver from Karachi, sold to the Americans for $5,000 because they thought he was someone else. 20 years in a cage and he never once was charged. His son Jawad grew up on a 15-minute phone call a year, a father who would only say he is in jail. At 13, Jawad went on the dark web to watch his father's torture videos. For years, he believed his father must have deserved it because, in his words, you don't torture anyone for no reason. He did not meet his father until 2023. A grown man meeting a stranger at an airport because suspicion took his father before he was even born. That is what suspicion produces. Not security, but the very monster it claims to defend against, and a childhood stolen from a boy who committed no crime either. When it is not states, but ordinary people who act on it, the ledger is just as damning. 2 genocides of Muslims in 30 years, Bosnia in 1995, Myanmar in 2017, a pogrom in Delhi in 2020, all fed by the same elemental claim that the proposition is making tonight.
If you value evidence over tribalism, subscribe to Hard-Hitting News 365. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.